Here's another field or allergic reaction. Serious signs may include pancreatitis. Tell you whether that patient probably changes.
Hi, Valerie. Can you hear us?
Yes.
All right, we got you too. Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock, so I will call to order the work session on the 29th. Let's see. So tonight we're gathered here to continue discussion on the RFP for the sale of the former Sitka Community Hospital site and associated properties. There was some questions that it appeared would be a little cumbersome and probably inappropriate to get answered at the assembly table. So we did call this work session together so that we could all talk somewhat freely about our desires and our needs in the RFP. I know John has a couple questions that he'll need answered tonight. And then if the assembly has anything else that they'd like to see in this RFP, we'll be giving some suggestions, some feedback on that tonight. Want to run this a little bit more casual if possible. I know it's going to be a little bit harder for those online. If you're really not getting a chance, please just jump in as we can, and I'll try and recognize you if you're not getting a chance. But let's have a free-flowing conversation tonight and try and get everything answered that the administrator needs. For those online, we do have Amy Ainsley in the room as well. She is available to answer any questions. Let's see, can you see? No, you can't see, but Brian Hansen is here as well. He's just out of camera view. He got a really good seat there. So he's available for questions as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to our administrator for kind of an overview introduction, and then some thoughts from him.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, as you said, I hope this is more of a free-flowing discussion. We can get some input and build this RFP with some of the comments that we hear. I put in the memo that you've heard the what do we call them? The town halls. You've seen the surveys that I will reiterate is a non-scientific survey, but you've heard some of the comments, a sector of the community. I think you've had some time to hear from the community through emails. I don't know if you have or have not received anything else. But we presented a draft RFP, I believe, at the meeting before last. And I know there were some questions about possibly changing some things up, and to not have to basically build an RFP during a regular assembly meeting where we'd have to make motions for every change and seconds and votes. I think what a smoother way to do this would be kind of hammer it out here in a work session. We'll take those comments, try to incorporate them. And then on May 11th at the next regular assembly meeting, we'll come back with what we hope to be close to a final draft. And then that can kind of minimize the number of motions we'd have to make for changes. So very similar to how we do the budget process. We talk to you through the budget process, and then we present a budget, and then we make motions for any of the final changes. So I kind of see the process going the same way. That said, we have not received the appraisal yet, but I was told by the appraiser that we will have it by the end of this week. And I checked again this morning and checked this afternoon. And although we don't have it yet, I still feel that we probably should not discuss the numbers on that appraisal in open session. So when we do get that, that will be available at the May 11th assembly session. And if anybody desires to go to executive session to discuss the amount on the appraisal, we could do so. I just wanted to more or less not put all our cards on the table before we put the RFP out looking for a competitive price if the intent is to sell the facility. So again, you will get the opportunity to review that. And as soon as I get it, I will get it out appropriately so it can be reviewed. That said, tonight, we're hoping to get some guidance on, we heard that there's still some leaning towards leasing. And if we want to add some more scoring criteria or an additional scoring criteria, if you want to change the weights on the existing scoring criteria to be more heavily weighted towards leasing, there's still some language in here about, this could still be subject to a public advisory vote that's in here. We kind of have a blank space for setting a minimum bid. So really, I just want to hear your questions and concerns and what we didn't incorporate that should be incorporated, and we'll do our best to get it in there. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a sort of procedural question. Ms. Nelson is online, right?
Yes, I believe she's online.
Okay, so I have for years admired her work with process and trying to keep us always on the right process. And I was wondering, do we have a process for online where people have their camera on so that we can, in a conversation, I'd like to be able to see the people in the conversation. And I don't know, Valerie, would you be comfortable with that?
There's not a process spelled out in code,
Just
as
speaking to
Zoom
me.
participation is fairly new.
Right.
But yeah, if comfortable, and Valerie, if you have a response.
I just turn it off when I'm not speaking so that you know when I want to speak, but I can leave the camera on if it's necessary. And the only reason I'm not there is because I'm still technically quarantining because some people are afraid of, me giving them COVID because I traveled 9 days ago.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I just want to, I don't know, I feel better in conversation when I can see people. And I appreciate also the weirdness of the year with having to be online. So.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only thoughts were after reviewing this was that, well, first of all, I do like that we have the placeholder in there for the minimum bid. I think that should be left in there. And second, the long-term lease, I really would like to kind of increase the value that we place in the RFP for that. I see that in the RFP, it does say we'll consider them, but I didn't see anything about the long-term lease in the scoring criteria. And I may have missed it, but if we could add that, I'd like to, add more weight in the scoring criteria for a long-term lease. That's my preference. Yeah, that's what in my initial thoughts for the moment. I just think Tor was raising his hand.
Okay, and I just have a clarifying question on that, and maybe we think about it and come back because it just popped into my head. When we more heavily weight a long-term lease, I'm just thinking of a potential situation where somebody leases the land, demolishes the building, and then wants to sublease it. Does that still accomplish our goals with it? And it's more food for thought, but they're the leasee of the land. They can demolish the building and do other uses. And if we weight a lease heavily, that might preclude a purchase by, say, a healthcare facility, a long-term care facility. So, yeah, Tor?
I'll think, yeah.
Sorry, the thing is, I really, when I saw we were doing this tonight without the assessment, it kind of gives me pause because it really makes a difference on everything. If we have a high assessment, I'm actually going to be much more inclined towards a sale. Whereas if it's a comparatively low assessment, I would be more inclined to favor a lease type situation. I think my value on this is really getting the best bang for the buck. And a lot of these decisions we're talking about doing kind of depend on what the assessed value is, or at least getting us in the ballpark. Like I said, I'm not crazy about the idea of a lease. I don't dead set against it, but I'd prefer a sale, just so it's kind of off our plate. But it really depends on how much it's worth. If the assessment comes back and says that it's basically only worth the land it's on, well, then I'd say, no, we should be leaning towards a lease. If they come back and say it's worth a huge amount of money, well, then I would say, no, we should put that in as the minimum, whatever the assessment is, should be the minimum bid, and go from there. So it's kind of hard to make some of these decisions without the assessment.
Yeah, Valerie.
And from the very beginning, I'd been advocating for the public to be involved in the process. I'm not happy that we're talking about this before we have the valuation or the assessment, because as you all know, we do have provisions in the code that says, real property disposal over, $5 million should have an advisory vote after, a certain amount of time. And I just think that we're short changing the public again. And, if Search is the one that gets it, they don't pay property taxes. So if people think that they're going to be paying a lot of property taxes, that's not true. I'm more in favor of a lease. They have 3 years left on their lease, I believe. And I don't like the fact that I've heard that they are, pushing for this and threatening other things. So I still am advocating for an advisory vote. Thanks.
I have a question, if that's okay. Do we have an idea in 2024, when the current lease runs out, what will it cost us to maintain this building if it's empty?
It'll be hard to get you an accurate number. I could probably come to the next assembly session with that, because that's more of a detailed look. I mean, mothballing a facility also, it always costs a lot of money. I mean, we've done it with aircraft. You mothball aircraft and it costs money, and you go and put them in a storage facility. So you need to get equipment out of there. You still have to have it climate controlled. You still need to perform some level of maintenance on it so the building stays intact and it's just not neglected. I think it would be a substantial cost. I just don't have a firm number for you. But we could go through it would more or less take a full inventory of the building and a condition assessment to put that number together.
I just see it as a risk to us to have that building in 2024 when the lease runs out, if we haven't come up with something better by then. And so as to the lease, the main reason I can think of to keep the property is its central location. And so in a little bit of digging into the 2018, what's it called? Sitka Police Station and Jail Planning Study. That site wasn't even considered in that study. So they looked at 22 sites and the hospital was not one of them. For an original building on an existing lot, like the Old City Shops, they had 3 preferred sites. One was the Old City Shops. And that was going to be $13 to $14 million for a build from ground up. So can anyone hazard a guess what it would cost to convert our hospital building, our old hospital building, to a jail? That's going to be total speculation, right? And not a jail, but a police department.
The best answer I could give you is the back of the napkin estimate I've used for just when I go out for any lobbying on getting financial support for a police department. I've been around $14 million is the number. And that seemed to be, in that Stantec report, that seemed to be kind of the average of those other sites that were considered. So I know it's not a true apples to apples comparison, but when I just look at, taking a building and rehabbing it and turning it into a jail versus building a new police department, it really is a guess, but that's the number I have been using.
I'm still leaning towards selling the building and selling the building and keeping the land. So I think I agree with Mr. Mosher, some kind of weighting system, but I need to think more about, would there be language, and maybe this is for Mr. Hansen, that would protect us so that if the building were purchased and demoed, that we then don't, I don't know. I want to protect the city, obviously, and one of those protections is keeping the land because of its central location, and yet allowing a respondent to the RFP to have the latitude and the ability to borrow. And you can borrow on a long-term lease. But I also don't want to narrow it so much that we get no respondents. So can you weigh in, Mr. Hansen, on what it would look like to lease the land and sell the building?
I don't think you can sell the building and lease the land.
You can,
the
cannot.
building, you cannot.
Okay,
And the building is part of the land. It's fixed to the land. It's part of the real property that would have to be sold. So the attached buildings and the fixtures to land are considered part of real property, and you can either sell them or convey them. That's the way I understand it.
and so a lease option would be to lease the building and the land as a package.
That's correct. There was a statement earlier by the mayor about if we lease the property, that the lessee could demolish the building. Well, that's true if we allow that as part of the lease. But frankly, in all of our leases and most commercial leases, you don't want to give the lessee the power to demolish or destroy the fixtures, the buildings that are on that site without the consent permission of the lessor, because there's a lot of times you're renting a commercial building. You don't just lease it out and give the lessee the right to demolish that building. Now, there are times when you want to consent to that to happen, or consent to them to build something on your lease property, but it doesn't come with the lease automatically. It's a matter of contracting terms that govern.
So theoretically, we could, like, for a long-term lease, we could, in the part of the negotiation, allow for that if the person who was engaging in that wanted to either demolish it or rehab it or add buildings, we could agree to start the negotiations for a lease. And in my mind, having the lease would allow us to have more control as to what happens on the property.
And control is exactly what you get by the lease. And we have a facility lease agreement with Search right now for the hospital facility. And in general terms, without giving you the specifics, they can't tear that down. They can't even make major improvements without notifying us what they want and getting our permission to do those major improvements. And I think, John, they've done that on several occasions.
Yeah, they just had a recent one with a construction of a parking lot.
Right.
So I'm not trying to hog the microphone. Yeah, I'm not super opinionated either way. It is for lease or sale. I kind of agree with some of what Tor said it too. If we get a high assessment, then it would probably be, in my mind, beneficial to sell. If it comes a little lower, it makes more sense to lease. I still would prefer a lease, but I just wanted to at least have equal footing, in the scoring criteria. I want that to be, I don't want it to be weighed heavily towards a sale. I'd like it at least more even so that we can have more control over what we choose.
Brian, as the lease or as the RFP is written, even though each one will be scored, does the assembly have the leeway to pick any of them? Is that even a legal course of action? So somebody scores the highest, but we decide that number 3 offers what we believe to be the best value.
That's correct. You have the discretion to do that. The scoring is a tool. It's not an absolute.
That's very good information.
So Brian, just to clarify on that, so you're saying if, entity A bids $10 million and entity B bids, say, 7 million, but we like their plan, what they're going to do with it better, we can pick the lower bid just because we like what they plan to do with it better?
Yeah, but why would you have the scoring methodology if you didn't use it,
Well, that's exactly what I meant. Well, for instance, maybe there's something that's not picked up in the scoring. For instance, entity A pays property tax and entity B doesn't, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I think it gives everybody an equal baseline to start from, but then that allows us some subjectiveness to it. Is it the highest and best use of the property? You pay me $100 million, but you're just going to make a parking lot. maybe not so much. Although $100 million is, John?
Yeah, I
If it's
think,
100 million, they can build a parking lot.
I think some of these questions might be answered already if we look at, and I hope I'm not simplifying this too much here, but Mr. Christensen's example about entity A pays property tax, the other one doesn't. One of the scoring criteria in 2.7.1 is benefits to the Sitka economy. And I think that's where you can use the scoring criteria, because you've got one on price, and now you've got this other criteria that says, well, this one's best value because of the score it received and benefits to the Sitka economy. We could also, I'm just throwing this out as an idea, under purchase offer, it's listed as 40 points available. We could simply change that to purchase/lease offer. And then when you get the appraisal and you review it, I think that might solve your problem of, I'd give a higher score if the appraisal for a purchase, if the appraisal came back at A versus if the appraisal came back at B. We could use that as, purchase and lease. Does that seem reasonable, Amy?
For the RFP that we issued for 4951 HPR, we left options available for both sale and lease in that RFP. And so in the scoring criteria, we had formulas that would calculate your score for both, a sale as well as a lease. So I think that's doable in the RFP.
Mr. Mayor, I would be remiss without closing my remark by saying that I think my general advice with regard to the scoring methodology being a tool, not an absolute, is correct, but you cannot dismiss the risk of litigation or bid protest when you have best value style of procurement, and it creates issues that could turn into a bid protest or a lawsuit. And I don't want to discuss, my recommendation is not to discuss this at the work session, just to tell you that it's out there. And that if you wanted to discuss it further, we could do so in executive session at a regular meeting.
Okay. Yeah, because my follow-up question to that is, what is that risk? Is it monetary? Is it performance? Is it what? But maybe I'll come meet with you offline then, and we can talk about that a bit more. But thank you for that.
I have a few things that I've been thinking about as conditions of sale. So that would not be at this point, that would be after the RFP. So things like first right of refusal, if it ended up being sold, that we would then have the first option to buy the site if it went up for sale in the future. Things like that. That's not in the RFP, that's in the sale, the agreement. If it's sold.
I don't know, honestly.
I've seen it done both ways. I mean, you could make that known up front. I mean, I've looked at buying houses before that said that walking in that I'll accept your offer, or this house is for sale, but I have right of first refusal if you plan to sell it later. And I've seen people who don't want their houses to ever be used as a vacation rental, for instance, and they will put terms on the sale before the sale even happens. So I think there's probably a way to work that in there, but we can investigate that.
Okay, because the other, I don't know if this is the time to bring up the other things that I'd be interested in. Just put it out there. So for example, additional behavioral health services, if a medical entity became the owner of our former hospital building, I'd sure like to see expanded behavioral health in Sitka. But I don't know if that can be, if that is financially impossible for a purchaser, then maybe that's not a fair request. But I see a need in Sitka that's unmet, and I'll leverage just about anything to meet that need. The other thing is some kind of a sale covenant for use of the space specifically for medical or human services needs. So does any of that need to be considered now? or wait and see if we have a lease offer, a sale offer?
Seems like it would be good to do it now, before we go any further, to add that into the RFP. That's just my thought.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I would leave that one up to the assembly. It's part of your strategy of looking for a proposal. You know, you could define exactly what you're looking for, down to the minor detail, but you're whittling down your pool. Or you could say, generally, I want it to do A, B, and C and see what the proposals come back as. So it's that balance of, you know, how much negotiating do you want to do on the back end, or do you want the exact option right in front of you when you start?
Right, and I'm struggling because I don't want to narrow the pool of applicants. It's not really my goal. On the other hand, I want to use every tool in our toolbox to try to get improved behavioral health services in Sitka. So it's something I think we could consider now, or
I also think when you narrow it too far, you perhaps temper your purchase or lease price as well. Like, well, okay, I might do this, but I'm only going to give you half of what the other guy might. So.
Well, at the
Tor?
minimum, we could at least
Yeah.
add the, sorry, Tor, at least I think it would be appropriate to add the first right of refusal. That is a very simple thing that we could throw in there.
Yeah, Tor.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with putting a first right of refusal in, but I would have a pretty big problem with the it's, you know, I think at the very least, it would reduce the amount we get a lot, and we don't know, I mean, I don't know if it's really appropriate for that. And I just don't think that that's the level of kind of engineering by sale that I would be comfortable with. And I'm not quite as much against saying it has to be a medical facility, just because it is. And I mean, let's face it, long-term care is an extremely profitable business. And it's set up for that now. So I'm not too concerned that it's not going to be that. Even if it's not Search that gets it, if it's another entity, they're going to want to make a long-term care facility out of it, because I can't really think of anything that you could use that for that would be make anywhere near as much money. Same with some of the other, you know, the doctor's offices and things there, the Mountainside. You know, I would think that might be, I could see a situation where somebody like UW says, you know what, we'll buy it and we'll open a clinic there where Mountainside is, and do long-term care and make some nice money and provide a service. So, you know, I just can't see anything else there, somebody putting real money into it for anything else there. I mean, not that would be able to put a successful bid forth. And I don't like narrowing our pool. If the will of the assembly is we want it to say it's going to be a medical facility, I'm not going to kick and scream and cry in my beer, but I just don't think it's necessary. And again, I don't like, I don't like narrowing our field. We could put in an RFP that the preference, it will be scored higher if it's a medical facility, so that if we get Stevens $100 million parking lot, that they would have to, okay, it wouldn't score as well, but it has a $100 million parking lot, which it's okay. With that, but I got a feeling that the property taxes alone on the $100 million parking lot might be an issue for them. But point being that if we wanted to, like, say, put it in the scoring, that I could see, but saying that it has to be a medical facility and nothing else, I'm not comfortable with. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess if we do narrow it down too much, at that point, I'm leasing for $1 to a very specific entity that we've already contacted and talked with, that, we want to come in. Because that was one of my thoughts. If Search's lease ran out, is who do we contact and who does lease it for $1 for mental or behavioral health? Or something along those lines. So, and I guess it really comes back to the subjective part to me, is that, we have a decent baseline here where we can get a solid score just to compare apples and oranges or apples and apples. And then the subjective part comes in a little bit where we can say, okay, but this plan appears that it would benefit the community better. The community is behind this plan, because I think that's going to be a large part that we haven't talked about, is community buy-in on whatever happens as well. So if there's large community buy-in, large assembly buy-in, but it ranks in our scoring criteria 3 or 4, that's where I like the subjective part. But I'm also not opposed to stating that we'll score a lease higher, stating that we'll score a medical facility higher. I'm okay going down those paths, but I think we can also make that happen within our current criteria.
Yeah, as this conversation is unfolding, I see the wisdom in not necessarily scoring the lease higher. I would just like that to be at least the lease added into the RFP, the criteria part. And so this way we just keep our options open.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can let go of the narrowing of it. It's more something that I just want to keep an eye on any possible method we can find to bring additional services to Sitka. So Mr. Leach, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I don't mean to detract from where the conversation is going now, but I opened this up. I was trying to catch up here, but we talked about the advisory vote issue, and it is in this RFP. And Ms. Nelson brought up where the code talks about real property disposal value at over $5 million. The advisory vote is also in there as a may for the lease option too, just the value changes. So if the property disposal via lease, if that value is more than $7,500,000, the advisory vote applies to that as well. Or the choice for an advisory vote applies to that as well.
John, Amy, questions that you need answered, things you're unclear on still?
What I have right now is that on that last part with the purchase offer, we'll look at that as purchase/lease offer. Does that sound correct? So we can analyze both of them. And then some language to include right of first refusal in there. Is there anything else that's been brought up that I've not included on our short list here? No changes in scoring numbers, criteria, anything so far?
Yeah, I just remember one of the big ones being, having that assessment in hand. And I agree that it is harder to work. Like, I think there's important things we can work through tonight, but that's a big missing chunk still. And that can definitely come forward when we go to approve this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that I'm happy where we are right now, or not I'm happy. I think we've gone as far as we can without the appraisal, because it really, so much of this make what the appraisal is, and if we have to be in executive session when we talk numbers, fine. But that, I mean, honestly, depending on what the appraisal is, I could say I don't want to sell it. Let's call it search and see if they want to just extend their lease, or maybe, hey, let's sell it as fast as we can, depending on what that is. And well, I just feel like we're working without enough information.
And that's fair. And as soon as we get that, I can assure you, I've pressed as hard as I can to get that report. And as soon as I can get it, I'll get it out. So you guys will have time to review it. And
were there barriers to getting the information they needed?
Not in the actual action of the appraisal itself. There were very limited people that even wanted to take it on, because it's a very small sector of people that can appraise a medical facility. We didn't want to search locally for that anyway, but even looking out throughout Alaska and in the Pacific Northwest, it was just really came down to one person, and that one person was busy with many other appraisals, and it was a hey, I'm going to be in Sitka these dates, I can do it there. And it takes some time to put that together. So no barriers that I know of, other than just not a lot of people willing to do it and a lot of work involved.
And a pandemic.
Yeah.
Also with market rates being so low, there's a lot of refinancing and stuff going on. So the entire appraisal market is just really stretched right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think we gave you some useful information. I think this is probably as far as we can go without the appraisal.
I guess I had one last small question. The purchase offer is rated at 40 and the benefits to the Sitka economy are rated at 20. And I had given some thought to making those equal 30-30. Based on the public comment we got, so many people said this site matters, whether they were pro sale, indifferent to sale, even against the sale. It tended to be based on the location. This is, central to our community. And so I'm wondering, we have to have something that benefits our community on that site, or it's maybe not worth selling unless, it is 100 million or more. So it's just a thought I had to change that to 30-30.
I would not support that. Not until I have the appraisal. If we're talking, it depends on what the appraisal is. I could see supporting that if the appraisal comes in fairly low. I think no matter what is being put there, whoever's going to be put forth a fair amount of money, almost by definition, that's going to be affecting the economy. But again, I really don't think we can make that call. I can't make that call until I know what the appraisal is.
Are we still able to change the RFP? We get the appraisal, then we finalize the RFP. Yeah, so let's not even worry about it until
That's
that
what I was
time.
just going to mention. I've got that one circled, and when we come back on the 11th, hopefully, and present this, once we know more information, if somebody wants to make that motion then and discuss it, we could make that change. That's an easy change to make.
But I think the point is actually really interesting and really valid for myself. The purchase price or lease price may be low, but the long-term economic engine that brings in more than pays out for that. And so that's, to me, that is a strong argument. A purchase price would be a one-time payment. An economic engine is going to propel Sitka into the future. Yeah, I hadn't looked at it as that, so I'll consider it between now and then. Thank you. All right, was there anything else from the assembly this evening?
So what is our process? The appraisal comes in and at a regular assembly meeting, we consider that because of the numbers in executive session? Or are we going to have another special meeting or work session?
Well, best we can do is put on the, well, we could put on the agenda that the executive session is anticipated. Obviously, somebody has to make the motion to go into executive session, but the way I would see it happening is we will have this RFP up for approval as one of the agenda items. And I'm sure discussion will happen over what the appraisal says. And I think at that point, then somebody could move to go into executive session to discuss that. Just speaking numbers, the other changes could be made in the open, but if you wanted to discuss the numbers of the appraisal, that would be probably an appropriate time to do so.
And I'm the last person who should be whining about more special meetings or whatever. You guys have been doing this for so many years, and here I am, the newbie, complaining about it. So I withdraw my whiny comment. On the other hand, to be able to talk freely is super valuable. So
Yeah,
if
I
we need
agree.
to have an extra meeting to do that, it's worth it.
I agree. It is hard sometimes for all these meetings, but the freedom to be able to speak at this, it's helpful. And this is a tough one, the Sitka Community Hospital property. It just is a big one and it's hard for everyone. So I think the time that we've taken to get public comment and the survey and all these meetings, It may seem belaborious, but it's very, very important to kind of get the temperature of the community and kind of come to a good decision on this. So one final question, Mr. Leach, would be, say the events kind of unfold as you just mentioned, we put it on the next agenda, we start discussing it, someone makes a motion, we go into executive session, we make some decisions there, we come out, we kind of finalize how we want the RFP. Would we have to go to like a first and second reading, or can we just approve it right then and there?
I think you have the opportunity to table something to another meeting to just get more opportunities to speak about it. I mean, it's not really a resolution or an ordinance that we're passing. It's a discussion, direction, decision item
Okay.
on the approval of the RFP. Now, if there's a sale or a lease ordinance, then that requires a few readings, but that's not what stage we're going to be at. It's just going to be the approval of the RFP.
Okay, Sarah's back there kind of nodding that we can make that. Okay, so we can complete that action all at once in one meeting, theoretically, if we're happy with it.
Yeah, and from what it sounds like at this meeting, we've kind of worked through some things. I would anticipate 1, 2, maybe 3 motions to change it. It kind of sounds like, so, I think we can work through that process fairly efficiently. And please don't think it was a final question. I just noticed conversation kind of dwindling down. So
We're good, thank you.
definitely not slowing it down or cutting it off. You can have as many more as you want,
No,
but
I'm good.
okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
Valerie or Tor, did you need anything else this evening?
Nope, I'm just going back to being miserable.
Well, that's a positive note to end on.
No,
right?
I've got a stomach bug. That's why I'm not there. I don't want to get you guys sick with, and it's slowly getting better.
Good. Brian, John, anything else that you needed from us? Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. I know it was a short meeting. It's super quick, but definitely I think this process would have taken a considerable amount of time out of a regularly scheduled meeting. So it's good to meet for 45 minutes and get it done as opposed to anything else. So with no further business in front of the assembly, I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting for the evening. Thank you much.